care in between. Physics, art, and math guide us down this path. Historical tales come alive, where science and stories dive. Blended facts with heart, knowledge from the start. MedBricks blues we sing to the future memory. Health and science in the mix. MedBricks got the fix. Complex subjects made
right
clear.
now
Every episode
in ways that we actually acquire
leads the way,
and ways that make me more efficient.
in the world of digital streams, turning knowledge into dreams. Through the tales of old, new stories unfold.
Thank you so much for joining with me. It is truly an honor and a privilege.
MedBricks Webcast is a new kind of healthcare media channel to break the silo mentality and foster interdisciplinary thinking. Our mission is to fill that gap and to create a curiosity through different lenses, tapping the passion that guided the historical figures in medicine and bringing present-day groundbreaking research to the front lines. We interview physicians and leaders in the industry about present-day healthcare challenges on our live podcast.
Hey, welcome to the MedBricks Webcast. This is Raman Raju. Let me introduce I'm going to introduce Dr. Eben Alexander. A lot of people, if you don't know, probably you are hiding, if you are a consciousness studier or anything like that, you must know Dr. Eben Alexander. He's a world-renowned author and a speaker. And then, he has so much to contribute to the science, world of science, neuroscience, and the world of the science of consciousness. Let me bring him to the table. He has a lot of experience let me bring him to the main stage. Welcome, Dr. Alexander.
Hello, Mana. It's great to be with you again. How are you?
Yeah, you're my frequent guest. I'm always enjoy your conversation with you. I've been following you since the day that you started a conversation with the Scientific American. That's where I saw you first time, and I started following. But anyway, Dr. Alexander, tell us a little bit about, everybody knows, but if you can repeat a little bit about your professional background. You're a Harvard trained neurosurgeon. Can you give us a little bit background of yours?
Sure. The background, basically, I had spent 54 years of my life honing a very kind of conventional scientific worldview. I taught neurosurgery as an associate professor at Harvard Medical School for more than 15 years. Thought I had some understanding of how brain, mind, and consciousness work. And then in 2008, in November, 16 years ago, I went into deep coma over just a few hours from a severe case of E. coli gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis. And in fact, the medical details of that case paint the picture of a brain that is in no shape whatsoever to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination. That's why I think my medical case is so important to the scientific community, and the medical case report that confirms everything I said in my book, Proof of Heaven, and goes beyond that to demonstrate the devastation of my brain, was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, September 2018. And that case report makes it very clear that my brain was not going to be able to produce any hallucination or dream. And yet I had the most profound experience, most memorable, detailed, kind of ultra real experience of my entire life at a time when my brain was demonstrably offline. I spent a week, 7 days or so in coma. And in fact, my doctors estimated I went from a 10% chance of survival to 2% by the end of the week, but with no chance of recovery. And that's why they recommended taking me off the ventilator, stopping the 3 powerful antibiotics I was on, and just letting me go. And it was a few hours later I started coming back to this world. And all I knew when I came back to this world was this extraordinary journey I had been on deep in coma. In fact, all the clues were there to tell me that the rich, ultra-real spiritual nature had to happen at a time when my brain was especially inactivated by this meningitis, a perfect model for human death when it attacks all lobes of the brain. And then even more miraculous than having an experience like that was having a full recovery over about 2 months. So that was all 16 years ago. And I've spent those 16 years of, first of all, trying to make sense of it myself, And then, of course, those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize there was a very crucial ingredient in my near-death experience. It had to do with the presence of a spiritual guide, and this reflects on the fact that I was adopted. My birth mother gave me up for adoption when I was 11 days old. I spent 4 months in a baby dorm before I was adopted because she was unwilling to sign the papers to let me go. And I grew up in a wonderful, loving family, my adoptive family. So I certainly, couldn't ask for better blessings than the family I was adopted into. And yet that kind of smoking crater from, the 4 months in the baby dorm, not with my mother, etc., had led to some deep kind of subconscious self-doubt. And I must say that my near-death experience confirmed for me very purely and beautifully the eternity of our souls, the connectedness of our souls, and that has to do especially with that beautiful guardian angel who was present in my NDE, but initially was a big mystery to me. But 4 months after my coma, when I got a picture in the mail of a birth sister who I'd never known, she had died back in 1998, and that picture cemented the reality for me that the journey was real. And it seemed way too real to be real because it really happened. And thence my 16-year dive into discovery, working with other scientists, integrating quantum physics, integrating neuroscience, philosophy of mind, parapsychology, all these kinds of human events into a more comprehensive model of consciousness that puts mind and spirit first and foremost. And in fact, in 2017, my current wife, Karen Newell, and I wrote a book called Living in a Mindful Universe, where we really kind of summarize the unification of science and spirituality that I think is ongoing in the science of consciousness studies today.
Dr. Alexander, yeah, you have an extraordinary journey, and I'm one of the fan of yours. But before we go into your journey, I want to ask your professional side. You did a lot of surgeries, neurosurgeries in Harvard. I came across one doctor. His name is Suresh Mukherjee. He is a student of your father in Harvard. That's what he said. Is that right? Your father was a famous neurosurgeon, or
Yeah,
is
my
it?
father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon who was also head of the Harvard Medical Alumni Association for years. He had a great love for Harvard, and I remember going back to his class reunions, until very, very later years, because my dad passed over at age 91. But interestingly enough, not only was he deeply connected with Harvard, as I became in my professional career, but he also was a beautiful guide in my life, a mentor. I mean, obviously, I admired him tremendously. He loved every person. No person was unimportant to him. Everybody had tremendous value. And he lived a life of love and giving. He also was very scientific. He was a chairman of a neurosurgical training program. And yet, he he had no doubt whatsoever in the reality of a loving personal God and the power of prayer, which he used in his neurosurgical practice to great effect.
Dr. Alexander, yeah, very interesting. That is, just your connection with the father is extraordinary. And also, you did some work on the MRI guided ultrasound research. Can you give us a little explore on that one, a little bit on that MRI guided ultrasound therapy?
Sure. Well, most of my career, especially at Harvard and then later through the University of Virginia, was spent trying to develop advanced technologies that would greatly enhance our ability to treat patients with serious problems like strokes and brain tumors, um, but do it with much less toxicity to the patient. And therefore, I was heavily involved in the 1990s and early 2000s in stereotactic radiosurgery, a way of giving high dose radiation to very well defined targets in the brain, and also doing work on the intraoperative MRI project with General Electric, which I worked on for the decade of the 90s and early
Uh,
2000s. And so we did all that. That was kind of my background. But then I got kind of tired of the medical politics in Massachusetts and ended up coming down to Virginia for a private practice job. And it's while I was doing that that I was invited by an old colleague who was at UVA to head up the research arm of the Focused Ultrasound Surgery Foundation. And that's the technology you're referring to here.
yeah.
Focused ultrasound surgery uses ultrasound for its therapeutic effect. You do not use it for imaging. This is very different. In
Very
fact,
good.
you often use MRI for the imaging that guides the focused ultrasound energy.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it's fascinating. It's a technology that I believe will absolutely revolutionize medicine in the coming years.
It's the
Anybody,
real-time function, like a functional MRI. Real-time, you're probing into the ultrasound probe and see the cranial inside of it. How does it work, Dr. Alexander?
what you mean the focused ultrasound?
Yeah, focus on ultrasound.
Well, I mean, the biggest problem with ultrasound in the brain, because my interest and focus was coordinating research centers around the world to use focused ultrasound in the brain. And for many years, when I worked at the Brigham, we were interested in ultrasound, but there was no way to get it into the brain because the skull is defocuses ultrasound. So it's useless trying to get ultrasound through the skull in a standard fashion like you can in other parts of the body. But a company in Israel, in SciTech, came up with a way, this is in the mid 2000s or early 2000s,
I remember.
they used a helmet with 1,000 ultrasound transducers, and they would basically just use a reverse time model to, and then use a CT image of the skull. So they had a very high resolution picture of the skull, and they knew where all these transducers were. And so then you could back correct for the defocusing effects of the skull and make all these transducers focus in the brain at a specific point. And you can actually steer it electronically. And given that you can visualize the temperature change on MRI to literally a degree or so centigrade, you can easily steer this little focus of ultrasound, put it just where you want it, and then apply the thermal energy or the mechanical energy to do all kinds of things. So it's being used to break down the blood-brain barrier. It's being used to kill tumors with the heat. It's being used to, in conjunction with nanoparticles, to contain what are normally very toxic drugs that couldn't be used systemically. But when they're in nanoparticles and then they cruise into the region of ultrasound energy, the nanoparticles open up and release all right there. So those are just three examples. You can also use it to lyse clots, for example, in strokes. So ultrasound has tremendous power as a therapeutic instrument. Anybody who's interested to learn more should go to the Focused Ultrasound Surgery Foundation website, and you'll find out a lot more. Neil Cassell from University of Virginia runs it. That's the work I was doing when I went into coma, actually.
What is the status of that devices and all those? Are they using around the country, around the world? What is the status of that situation?
Well, it's being used more and more. I know that at UVA, for example, here in Virginia, Dr. Elias has used it very effectively to treat essential tremor. So in functional neurosurgery, functional is where you actually do something to alter the wiring of the brain for pain, for obsessive compulsive disorder, for depression, for Parkinson's disease and essential tremor, other movement disorders. Those are all fall in the category of functional neurosurgery. And focused ultrasound, this work by Dr. Elias is very impressive, how they can non-invasively treat targets deep in the brain with focused ultrasound and get a very beautiful therapeutic effect with very few side effects. So yes, it is being used. There are other centers around the world using it to break down the blood-brain barrier, using it to facilitate delivery of antibodies into the CSF, many, many, many things. But just go to Focused Ultrasound Surgery Foundation website and you can learn a lot more.
Dr. Alexander, you're a man of science. Then you had a very, very different kind of experience. You're not the in a true sense, not a religious that much in the beginning before that your profound experience of a near-death experience. Tell us that, the reason I was mentioning about near-death experience is very close to me in that sense that my brother died with the same bacterial meningitis, and he went to India. He was retired from Canada. He was a nuclear design engineer. And then he went there one day, got the bacterial meningitis, next day he died. It was a profound effect on all our family members. We didn't expect it was so profound. We are all close to him. He's like a father figure to all of us.
How long ago did that happen? How long ago did you lose him?
Is it 2 years ago? 2 years ago that
Years.
he
Well,
was
I'm so
convicted.
sorry to hear that. I know how difficult that is for the family. I know how rough it was on my family to almost lose me, and
Yeah.
um, I try to help people who are in similar situations as best I can. It's very tragic. Meningitis is a perfect model for human death, and that's why it can be so devastating.
Actually, the miracle is not from coming out, coming with a full mind back to the, like you came up with a full swing, all the right books and start lectures around the world. That is a miracle itself. Tell us a little bit about that miracle part of it. How does it defy kind of a science, medicine in that sense?
I'm sorry, I'm missing the question. How does what?
No, you recovered. Recovery is a big thing, right? The people
Yeah.
who go through the bacterial meningitis, they go through a lot of. They don't recover that easy. They're vegetative state most of the time. But
Right.
you recovered fully, and the wrote books, and tell us that defies science, right? It is not a
Well,
scientific.
it does, and that's an important point because in that case report that I mentioned on my medical records, it was came out in September 2018, Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. Not only did they make it clear that my brain was in no shape to have any kind of dream or hallucination, but they also focused heavily because they were asked, they were challenged by the peer review editors of the scientific journal. How do you explain this case? It's a recovery that's beyond any kind of medical explanation. This is unprecedented in the medical literature. And the doctors who wrote the case said it's because he had a near death experience that he had this profound recovery. And the doctors all involved all knew of other cases. For example, Anita Morjani, who had this advanced lymphoma, wrote the book Dying to Be Me. And that was back in 2006. And her advanced lymphoma, when she had her NDE and then came back to this world, she knew the cancer would disappear. And it did. Her doctors kept trying to biopsy it. They couldn't find any more cancer. It was gone. Also, the case of Dr. Mary C. Neal, orthopedic surgeon who was kayaking in Chile in the late 1990s. And she had an over 30-minute warm water drowning with her legs broken under boulders deep under a waterfall. She was brought to the surface dead. And ask any doctor how, the brain's going to be after over 30-minute warm water drowning. They say, forget it. There's nothing left. And yet she ended up making a full recovery, going back to orthopedic surgery. And just like Anita and like myself, she's gone around the world sharing her experience. This is important because, in fact, it shows us as healers how crucial a kind of a spiritual connection with the universe is. And so this is the big lesson of near-death experiences, is that we're all bound together through these forces of love. And I believe that the best way to kind of live our life most fully here is, as best as we can, manifest unconditional love, kindness, compassion, mercy for all of our fellow beings, when necessary, forgiveness. But the more we do that, the more we bring this love to the world, the more the world kind of reflects that love back to us. And this is what brings us wholeness and healing. And I think especially at this time of year, when we're approaching the holidays, New Year's, Christmas, these kinds of things, they are a good cause for kind of reflection on how we've lived our lives with others. Have we been as good as we can be in terms of handing out love and compassion and kindness to all of our fellow beings? And this begins with being loving to ourselves, not in an egotistical way, but in a higher soul way. And so I think it's a perfect kind of season to be talking about NDEs, the deep lessons of life reviews, how this is all about love. And also, I know we mentioned minutes ago, you asked me about our recent trip to Morocco.
That's exactly. I wanted to mention something. They're saying that with this Eastern mystical experience, you took it to the center of Islamic civilization. That must be a very different experience. Tell us that is a very
Well,
profound way. Yeah.
well, what I would say about it is the deepest lesson well, I've several big, deep lessons from my journey, but one of the most important in terms of our culture is a realization that this love of this God force is available, whether you call that God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, all the many names humans have used. But NDEs tell us focus on the central concept. The deepest message from the prophets has always been about love, kindness, mercy, acceptance, non-exclusive. So to the extent that any religion and prayer and meditation can foster this beautiful sense of how we're all in this together, and we're not confronting anyone, we're here to help each other, that's all great. To the extent that any religion starts to violate that and use ideology to pit us against each other, sadly, that religion has lost its way. And I mentioned Morocco because to us, it was beautiful to see that every minaret in the country, the minarets, of course, are the towers where the call to prayer occurs. Every minaret in Morocco has a spire on top that has 3 globes on it. And the bottom globe, the larger one, is for Islam. The middle globe is for Judaism. And the top globe is for Christianity. So in other words, these minarets are calling to God in prayer, but doing it acknowledging the interfaith power of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And I would add to that Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Zoroastrianism. I think all of these faiths are trying to unite us in love, mercy, acceptance, kindness to each other, to live together in peace and harmony. That is the biggest lesson. And luckily, my NDE was very strong in making this point that we're all bound together through with this God force at the core of our very awareness through our ability to go into consciousness. This is why we're such big fans of meditation, centering prayer. But really, it's all about working together and being together and not being in conflict.
You were with another doctor, another physicist, William Phillips, who did he was he got the Nobel Prize. He was the Nobel Prize in physics. What he did was very interesting. Is very Bose-Einstein condensate is really that he trapped the atoms through lasers. He invented that. That is really opening up a new branch of science. And he is also a part of your colleagues in the Moroccan tape. I saw that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. It was an absolute joy meeting William Phillips and his wife, Jan. They're from Maryland, and so they're not far from us. And we spent a bunch of time with them. And as you say, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1997 for his work using lasers to cool atoms to within a few thousandths of a degree of absolute zero. I mean, his work is absolutely astonishing.
Yes, very good.
And he gave a beautiful talk on his work. But the interesting thing to me was that he has a very strong belief in God and prayer. He has all his life. And yet for him, it's not necessary to try and, have the physics and the scientific knowledge be compatible with his belief in God. I will tell you that there was a quote I shared with him that he said he had never heard before, but he really loved. And it's a quote I love from Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg said, "The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will lead you towards atheism. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you." And to my mind, that's absolutely true. It has everything to do with understanding the deep message that quantum physics is trying to deliver to us. And yet, he loved that quote. And I asked him, I put forward that to me, the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022 for entanglement, that went to John Clauser, Anton Zeilinger, and to Alain Aspect. That prize basically, some of the kind of scientific press said goodbye to realism when that prize came out. And the reason they said that, excuse me one second, is because entanglement shows an information connection through the universe that basically transcends our normal notions of space and time and their limitations. And although William Phillips was quick to point out that our current understanding of entanglement does not enable for faster than light transmission of information, which I admit is true, but I still believe very strongly that what entanglement is revealing is kind of the mental layer of the universe. It's the part that we have access to in our mind that really mystifies quantum physicists, and has ever since the beginning, the ones who acknowledge the primacy of consciousness. And this is something Karen and I addressed very deeply in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, in 2017. We went into great detail about how quantum physics is part of this equation. And the main reasons that you pay attention to quantum physics in discussions of consciousness, for one, the fact that the observer, there's something very magical about the observer and the kind of mental choices of the observer that affects the experiments in ways that transcend our normal notions of four-dimensional space-time and its limitations. So that's one important point, but also even more so from the neuroscientific viewpoint, it has to do with the mind-brain relationship and the work of John C. Eccles. He won a Nobel Prize in 1963, an Australian physiologist who worked with ion channels and synaptic vesicles and neuronal function. I read a book that he wrote I think it was last published in 1994. It's called How the Self Controls Its Brain. And it's a beautiful kind of expose of why the prior arguments from materialist scientists who would say free will is an illusion because it's all just the workings of subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, cells in the brain, all following the laws of physics, chemistry, biology. But where would you even put free will? There's no way if it's all this material stuff following material laws. And the answer is that we're really not just experiencing some naked reality in the physical realm, but more of a conceptual reality, a dashboard of what is out there. And one of the biggest lessons from quantum physics is that we do not have an objective physical world out there that's independent of observation. And that, I think, is important. For example, John Wheeler, in his participatory anthropic principle, is focusing right on that issue of mind. Schrodinger wrote a beautiful paper on mind. And Eccles' book, by the way, shows that there is no violation of energy conservation requirements in the fire or no fire decision of neurons, because they're inside of that Heisenberg uncertainty principle level of energy. So there can be top-down causality, as George F.R. Ellis, the South African mathematician, has written about. And I believe that's what consciousness is this kind of massive form of top-down causality, where that mind of the universe, which is what we wrote about in Living in a Mindful Universe, that God mind, is really present in all of us, but it's filtered in. It's all interconnected in that larger kind of mental space. Anyway, it's a whole bunch of big, deep topics, but that kind of covers briefly why quantum physics is related to this question of consciousness.
Just before I bring introduce Ursula, I want to talk with you about that. I want to mention John Bell is a inequality theorem. It's actually a mathematical proof. It is a profoundly changes the quantum entanglement aspect of it. How you proved a mathematical way, a tricky way, very strange way. You proved it. I used an analogy on the Merman square. That's a magical square. So I think one of the things that he proved that besides those three guys, Nobel Prize, John Bell truly deserves Nobel Prize. But
very, very good point. And what I would just to illustrate for people who don't know this history. In many ways, that whole discussion started with the EPR paper, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen, back in 1935. So it showed Einstein and Bohr were in great disagreement about how to interpret quantum physics. Einstein had his ideas that he thought would ultimately involve hidden variables that would preserve this concept of local realism. Well, 30 years later, John Bell has the wisdom in the mid-60s to realize, hey, you can actually do experiments and measure statistics and figure out if it's hidden variables or spooky action at a distance, true entanglement. And then he puts the paper out there. He hears nothing, crickets. It's about 4 years later that John Clauser contacts John Bell and says, I'm sure many others have written you about this. What experiments are being done to validate your inequality? And John Bell said, you're the first one to reach out to me. So anyway,
actually, John Clauser is from a few miles from here. He experimented. He took all the, discarded Radio Shack equipment, and he did that experiment. So, but anyway,
Amazing.
that is the story. Yeah.
Well, John Bell deserves tremendous credit for that because he
Yeah,
was the real brains behind the operation.
yeah.
And but anyway, Clauser's, they all thought John Bell, Clauser, they thought they would confirm Einstein that it was hidden variables. But no, the statistics showed it was true entanglement. And every single experiment, through the brilliant work of Alain Aspect with his fast optical switches, and then Anton Zeilinger using input from stars, hundreds of light years across the sky that could never interact with each other to set the parameters for the experiment. And they all showed the same thing, that it's true spooky action at a distance, that local realism, something about local, the physics involves only local contact of particles, and also realism, the notion that a reality exists before observation. Something about that is completely wrong from the viewpoint of the John Bell experiments. Anyway, we're finally getting somewhere with the entanglement Nobel Prize in 2022. From my perspective, it shows that finally science is maturing beyond the simplistic Newtonian determinism of four-dimensional space-time into a recognition of a much deeper kind of mental connection across the universe.
So that's why I want to bring Dr. Ursula Lentini. She's a good friend of mine from Atlanta, Georgia. She's my hometown. She is a long-time practitioner of panic healing, and then I attended a lot of her sessions. In fact, she was I learned quite a bit from her. She was talking about consciousness. Even though I came from India, my mindset was a physics background, and she taught me a lot of these things in the area of different things, understanding of the mind itself. So then I mentioned her name, and I wanted to, she is a much more well-vested. She got a PhD she has a doctorate in consciousness studies. So she will be a better candidate to ask questions on the consciousness than me. So welcome, Ursula. Any questions for that?
Yes.
Hello, Ursula. How are you?
Wonderful, Dr. Alexander. I really appreciate your work and your transparency, because in the medical profession, it's very different than the spiritual profession, and you're tying the two together, and its time has come. So I'm really glad you're putting yourself out there. I'm wondering and very curious, specifically in the next year, because I see a lot of changes happening, and I see that there's a shift, right? We're working on that shift of, they say 3%. If 3% can raise their vibration, we can make a shift in consciousness. What do you see coming up in this next year in the sound therapy world and consciousness, meditation, all of that, plus things that are shifting on the 3D world? Because I believe that we're causing a lot of the shakeup that's happening with corruption and the sex trafficking and all the terrible, ugly things that are coming to surface now. And as we all raise our vibration back to our humanity, where we were more loving kindness before all these inventions, and so where there was not competition but collaboration, I'm just very curious, what is your ideas of what needs to happen in the future, and how can we all participate?
Well, as you mentioned, sound healing to me is very important. I've ever since about 2 years after my coma, so ever since about 2010 or 2011 or so, I've been using sacred acoustics for deep meditation. This is a form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment. My wife and partner and co-author of the third book, Karen Newell, she is the co-founder of the company that provides these sacred acoustics binaural beat tones. I was first introduced to the concept through a Scientific American article by Gerald Oster. I think it was in September or October of '74. It's called Binaural Beats in the Brain, and it's an excellent article. At the same time, I ran into two people from the Monroe Institute who invited me to come experience binaural beats in their fashion. And ever since then, I've been fascinated and found these to be incredibly powerful. They cause an oscillation in the lower brainstem that I think is a part of the mechanism, given that they're appealing to a circuit that arose more than 300 million years ago in evolutionary neurobiology. So for me, they've been a powerful way to kind of separate from the here, now, and sense of self of our normal waking consciousness. and to get more into that hypnagogic space of non-temporally located consciousness. It's far grander. Same kind of consciousness I experienced in my NDE, I've been able to duplicate to some degree through meditation. But for the bigger aspects of your question, I am very optimistic about the way things are going. Now, that may sound crazy given the headlines, the kind of madness and insanity and political polarization, the warfare and violence. I mean, I'm not ignorant to some of the extreme hardships people are going through now. But I also realize that the scientific community is making significant progress in adopting this kind of notion of idealism, or I would say more specifically, panentheism, the notion that God force unites us all and is the source of our very conscious awareness and the source of this emerging world. And once you start to acknowledge the power of that spiritual force that all of us can come into contact with through meditation and centering prayer, I think, just as you said, 3% or so is kind of the commonly acknowledged benchmark, where if you can get that many people in a community meditating, or that many people in a certain civilization kind of recognizing these kind of higher principles and unification of consciousness through a deeper spirituality that's fully based in science, then the world starts to shift. And in fact, I think what you said earlier, and something I would certainly agree with, is I believe a lot of the craziness we see in the world today, the apparent polarization, is actually because the fundamentalist thinking of many of those people feels threatened. At some deep level, they know that there is a more holistic, united, harmonious, pacifying effect coming to this world through a deeper understanding of the scientific validation of one mind, that we're all truly in this together. I mean, that's the deepest lesson of near-death experiences. You know, if you look at life reviews that occur in anywhere from 25 to 50% of NDEers, and have going back through thousands of years, and many people who are formerly atheist or agnostic can have
Yep.
NDEs, but more than 90% of NDEers, including those former atheists and agnostics, come away believing and knowing in the reality of a loving God force. Now, I'm not going to put a religious label on it, but say a force of love and of kindness that unites us together and shows us that healing and wholeness and well-being can be a gift the more we kind of unite and acknowledge that we're all in this together. And life reviews confirm that very well. A recent study published by Bruce Grayson, one of the foremost MDs studying NDEs as a skeptical psychiatrist for the last 45 years. And in an article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies back in the fall of 2021, he said that 76% of life reviews involved seeing the events of your life from the perspective of all involved. Very important point. So if you hand out pain and suffering to others, if you're greedy or selfish, in your life review, you're on the receiving end of that. So it doesn't feel so good. And that's why life reviews gently nudge all of humanity and sentient life towards a more loving, compassionate, kind kind of way of living life. And in fact, you know, as much as the war in Ukraine is horrible, the war in the Middle East is horrible, I can't even come up with words to describe how much I detest such violence and suffering of innocence. But the fact remains that if you graph out battlefield deaths, violent crime, things like that going back for a century, you'll find that humanity is slowly improving. Now, those wars are big steps backwards, but the reality is humanity is, in many ways, kind of healing and becoming more loving and compassionate over time. And I think that's probably partially due to that kind of 3% effect that you mentioned, that more and more people around the world are getting involved in kind of a conscious, mindful living that reflects that we're all truly in this together. And just as life reviews tell us, if you hurt another, you're hurting yourself. It's like the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe through the life review of near-death experiences.
So I am Dr. Alexander. I'm there's a different war coming up. What the war is from the Silicon Valley where I'm from is artificial intelligence. One of the thing is that consciousness is the some section of people, the two schools of thoughts, one school of thought is that mind is independent of the brain. There's a physical and the dualism. The other one is the mind is the emergent property of the brain, because now the global workspace theory and new theories are coming up. It's a very strongly suggesting maybe the computers may possess the intelligence and the consciousness. What is your take on that?
Well, I think important to point out that those kind of theories, materialist theories of consciousness and its relation to information processing, often ignore the fact that telepathy is real. If you read Guy Leon Playfair's book on twin telepathy, you'll find that more than 35% of identical twins have powerful telepathic experiences. One of them can touch a hot stove, and the other twin 1,000 miles away may develop a blister and feel pain. And of course, telepathy is also present among many of us, not just identical twins. I know the day I went into coma, my birth mother, who I had just met 1 year before my coma, and we'd spent months, kind of back and forth together, but a few months now not communicating. And then that November 10th, 2008, when I went into coma, she came back from a business trip and knew I was in trouble and called my family to find out I'd gone into the ICU with severe meningitis that morning. So that was a telepathic connection I had with my birth mother, even though I hadn't known her for 54 years of my life. Also, remote viewing. Now in Wikipedia proudly says remote viewing is pseudoscience, but that's because Wikipedia is a pseudo encyclopedia. And it turns out that, for example, Jessica Utts, who was the head of the American Statistical Association in 2015, she had spent studying more than 20 years of data on remote viewing from Stanford Research Institute. And basically, she said statistically that the chance that all those remote viewing experiments were due to chance alone and not due to a real effect, p less than 10 to the minus 20th. So, forget about it. Remote viewing's absolutely real. And I know Karen's good at it. I've tried it. I've done okay at it. I'm not as good as Karen is. And I know some people who are extremely good. For example, Joe McMoneagle is a friend of ours, lives not far from here. He was RV001 in the U.S. intelligence program, extremely successful remote viewing.
Sorry to interrupt you. Actually, I attended that one of in the Palo Alto, right here in Stanford. Taggart wrote a book, and I met him actually. Remote defense laboratory, U.S. defense actually did this lot of research. It came out to be some of them are astonishing in the remote viewing side, Yeah.
Right. So, but Jessica Utts is making the point that remote viewing, and in fact, she would say precognition, the work of Daryl Bem, which really kind of defies our materialist models of understanding reality. But all these things, and these are all things we mentioned in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, to tie all this together. But what it points out is that we live in a far grander universe than I might have thought before in my training, especially when I was harboring kind of conventional materialist neuroscientific thinking about the brain creating consciousness. And I now know completely, without doubt, that is false, that consciousness is a far more fundamental property of the universe. It's more like we're sharing the mind of the universe, and the brain serves as a filter, a reducing valve, as it used to be called, to allow that primordial mind, that God mind that so many have encountered in an NDE and similar extraordinary experiences. But we realize that is something available to all of us.
Ursula, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I have another question. So I know you have the medical model background, but now you have the quantum consciousness. How would you describe disease, manifestation, and cure?
Well, all I would say is we have tremendous power to heal ourselves. And that's another topic of discussion in Living in a Mindful Universe, where we start with placebo effect. And of course, placebo effect has been around for thousands of years, but it's been formally applied, in double-blind statistical studies to prove medical devices and medications, etc., for the last 60 or 70 years. And placebo effect is not, when you move beyond the fact that it's not just a sugar pill fixing a headache, but you start to dig deeply into power of placebo, you understand it's really showing us the power of patients, of humans, of sentient beings to come into greater wholeness and healing through their own efforts. There's also, you can move up from placebo effect to spontaneous remission. If you go to noetics.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, put in the search term spontaneous remission. You'll find a book that they wrote. It was, I think, Hirschberg and O'Regan, something like that. I'm sorry, I'm blocking on the names. Mid-1990s, published by Noetic Sciences, with more than 3,500 cases of people who had exhausted standard medical approaches for cancer and infections, things like that. And then there were methods beyond that. And the methods beyond generally were things like taking, processing negative emotions, to adopting more positive emotions, through appealing to kind of a spiritual nature and purpose in life, etc. And I know that Kelly Turner wrote a beautiful book called Radical Remission, where she took 1,000+ cases from that database, the Noetics database, that were all cancer patients. And she found that 6 of 9 factors that she found to be very important in that additional healing were spiritual factors. And then, of course, we can graduate to the next level, which is miraculous healing in near-death experiences, like my case of healing from the severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis, Anita Morjani healing from her advanced lymphoma, Dr. Mary C. Neal healing from her over 30-minute warm water drowning. And all of us were able to come back with this complete healing that really defies medical expectations. And all of us had rich, deep spiritual journeys showing us the reality of that God force at the core of the universe. So it's really about waking up to these kind of cases and acknowledging that our spiritual nature, and by spiritual, I don't imply anything religious, although religions can be very helpful. But for us, spirituality simply means the notion of shared mind with that God force, with all fellow beings, shared purpose in our existence, and shared meaning to the events of our lives. So meaning, purpose, and kind of connected mind are all you need for spirituality. And in fact, everything we say about this kind of spiritual universe, you don't have to ever appeal to any kind of religious ideologies. But again, I'm not putting down religions as long as they very much foster this beautiful sense of love, compassion, kindness without any exceptions. That's so important, because some modern religious ideologies trying to put up a wall, keeping other sentient beings out. And you cannot do that, because we're all in this together.
Dr.
Wonderful.
Alexander, the placebo effect is defied science, right? Is defied kind of medicine, because another Harvard physician, actual Harvard doctor, they discovered the placebo effect
Right.
during the war, World War II or World War One.
It was World War II. It was Beecher was his name.
Nature, yes. So
Yes.
tell us, you think that defying the science and medicine didn't follow any protocols of the science. What do you think that the placebo effect is?
I think it's mind over matter, spirit over matter. We have tremendous power to heal. When I look back on my case, and I've discussed it with my doctors in detail, and that there is no medical explanation for how I came out of that, and over 2 months had a complete recovery. In fact, a huge part of my illness was complete amnesia. When I was in my NDE, I had no memory of humans, this earth, this universe. It was a completely empty slate. When I woke up on that ICU bed on day 7 and they extubated me, I didn't even recognize my mother, my sisters, my sons at the bedside. All I knew was this extraordinary, ultra real spiritual journey I had just been on. But my language and memories of, personal memories came back very quickly over hours and days. All my semantic knowledge of neuroscience, of physics, of cosmology, over about 2 months of time, every bit of it came back. And astonishing, as we discuss in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, the memories were more complete after they returned than they had been before coma. And I knew that from several very detailed discussions with family and friends, both before coma and then after coma, that revealed that my memories were now much more complete. We talk in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, how one of the last nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience is that memories are not even stored in the brain. And
Both
we
of
talked
you,
about Robert Penfield and his work, his book, Mystery of the Mind in 1975. But now the evidence is much, much stronger for that. And neurosurgeons have observed that there's never been a case of long-term memories removed with any brain resection at all. You can damage the medial temporal lobes, hippocampus, entorhinal cortex, things like that, and prevent conversion of short-term to long-term memories. But that's not the same as finding a repository of long-term memories.
both of you can answer this question. Probably we are in the middle of the holidays before I close the session. I wanted to ask you, I remember my father and my mother and my brother passed away. It's a lot of, I met my daughter yesterday. It's a circle of life. I see that. What is the meaning of all it of it? I still, as a science, as a man of science, like you, and I'm a physics background. I struggle with this purpose of life, meaning of life. That as a science, I cannot answer that through science. What do you think of it? Both of you can answer this question. Let me start with Dr. Alexander first.
Well, I mean, to me, for one thing, it's important. I think most importantly, the directive is the same as the entrance of the temple to Apollo in Delphi, Greece. Know thyself. But thyself is basically the entire universe, given that we're sharing the mind of the universe. And gain that knowledge by acknowledging that we're all bound together through the forces of love that become absolutely crystal clear as the only ingredient of the universe to indie ears who go to that depth. Love is what binds us. At that deepest level, for me, it was the core, infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with the divine God love of the Creator, that co-creative force. And it's a force that is so comforting and also so natural. It feels right. It brings back a memory. This is our spiritual home. And I think the more we can come to know this universe through this deep sense of oneness and connection with the universe and that binding force of love, that's how we come to truly know ourselves. And that, to me, is the purpose of life, ultimately becoming one with that God force of pure consciousness.
Beautiful.
Yes, I completely agree. So I always say it's evolutionary process. Inhale, exhale. We started with the Big Bang from nothing to something in this experience that we're having on this planet, dualistic, and to evolve through understanding ourselves, to know thyself, just like you said, Dr. Alexander, but through a process of experiences. Because when we're ghosts or pre-human, we don't have the ability to taste, to hug, to gaze, to make music, to do these things that we are the creators. So we're mini creators of the divine intelligence here to evolve to know that we can be manifest and spiritual through the manifestation and bring it into a fruition. Because scientists, right? They always want to prove something. So God is love. Okay, great. Or love is the consciousness. Go ahead and prove it. So I have a funny joke that God said, okay, we said, the spirits, we want to play, we want to create. God said, okay, just go ahead. Here's a little planet in the corner of the universe. Go ahead. All you have to do is make the right choice. And we said, great. Thousands of years later, we're still scratching our head like, what did he say? What are we supposed to do?
But we're contributing to the evolution of consciousness itself. It's the interactions. We often use the analogy, Karen and I do, that God mind of pure love is like a diamond, but each of us is like a facet on the diamond. So we're never separate from it at all. We simply offer a different perspective, and it's the interaction of those perspectives that leads to the evolution and transformation of consciousness, of that God mind. That's what we're all participating in.
You mentioned Karen, you mentioned Karen, I interviewed her on my channel, and then she is Sacred Acoustics. I recently made a post in LinkedIn, I said that I heard some music, Indian music. I went to the Indian concert. You know, if I meet my maker tomorrow, is he going to listen to my quantum theory, or is he going to listen to the divine music of the sound of those ladies? You know, that is a very revelation to me in that sense. Is that that music and the power of that music, power of sound itself, is such a powerful force in nature. Tell us a little bit, Dr. Alexander, about.
Well, I agree with you completely. And this reminds me, returning to that story of Jessica Utz, when she gave her presidential address to, I think, 6,000 statisticians back in 2015. And she said, that precognition and remote viewing had been proven beyond any reasonable doubt from a statistical scientific viewpoint. But then she asked her audience, what would you like, more data or a personal experience? And most of the audience said personal experience. And of course, we were with William Phillips last week, and he said, well, that means they're not scientific. But I'll tell you, personal experience is very important. Richard Feynman, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, said there's a tremendous amount of truth that will never be scientifically proven. And a lot of that is the kind of truth we can come into through personal experience, meditation. For me, sacred acoustics has been incredibly powerful. And anybody who wants to learn more can go to sacredacoustics.com. But personal experience is really crucial to help people get to the next level. Neuroscience alone is not going to give us all the answers. For example, if you study psychedelic substances, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, things like that, and then you do fMRI, you find the brain is going dark. The tools we have to look at the neuronal function don't explain to us where those phenomenal experiences are coming from. You have to move beyond the brain and the physical world to really get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And this is where prayer and meditation, I think, can be of such great value.
Absolutely beautiful. Anything you want to final words? I honestly thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Always wonderful to learn from you. You are a true teacher and a guru in that sense. I learned you're a man of science, and I learned quite a bit of your father's journey. That you're talking about your father is a really that is a profound to me. Then one of the doctors that I interviewed recently was a student of your father. He was telling me how good he was and how well known he was. So this
Yeah,
kind of
well,
connections that humans carry to the next level, it is beyond science, beyond just quantum physics or physics itself. It is just a beyond a world. Nick Bostrom says a simulation of the world that we get
yeah.
into. Thank you
Well,
so much. It's truly an honor, Dr. Alexander. Tell us a little bit of anything you want to say, final words.
Well, I was just going to say that anybody who still wants proof of the reality, scientific proof of the reality of the afterlife, go to bigelowinstitute.org. You'll find 29 essays there written 3 years ago, and they will convince you from many different scientific directions that the afterlife is absolutely real. In fact, you will also come to realize that reincarnation is real. The UVA work is indisputable. Most of us don't remember past lives because they're natural processes that cover them over at age 6 or 7, so that nobody or very few people remember them beyond that. But with hypnotic regression, NDEs, etc., they can be recovered. So anyway, but go to bigelowinstitute.org. You'll realize that the scientific proof of the afterlife is already right there for anybody who cares to read it.
Ursula, last word for a woman. Shall I go ahead? give us.
So back to the evolutionary process, our job here is to realize that this is heaven on earth.
Thank you so much, and
Ursula, great to meet you.
You
it's truly an
too.
honor.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Dr. Alexander, you're always wonderful to have you anytime. You've been a frequent guest. Even when I was not popular, you've been coming. It's truly an honor for me. Thank you so much. If you could hang around, we can talk a little bit more.
Well, it's an honor to be here with both of you. Thank you very much, Ramona.
Thank you.